So with that, here's Erica Neal.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us, and thank you for the amazing work that you have done documenting the protest in response to Michael Brown's death. I just wanted to introduce each of you. We have with us Robert Cohen, the award-winning photojournalist with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Richard Riley, who is a principal photographer with Art Magazine. Derek Phillips, a freelance photographer, photojournalist. And Bassam Masari, a live streamer who has been on the protest battlefield for quite some time. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to this conversation. So I guess my first question as we go back to the tragic events of August 10th, 2014, where we all know Michael Brown was killed, young man about to start his college career, walking home. It depends on who you talk to, you get a different story. Of course, if you talk to the police, you get one story. If you talk to eyewitnesses, you get another story. And we certainly cannot talk to Michael Brown to get his story, but there have been many voices speaking for him. And your work, your photographs, have been part of that voice speaking on behalf of Michael Brown. And so, again, I want to thank you for doing this work because it certainly has helped in not making the loss of his life empty. Your work has been part of fulfilling dreams that he himself has not been able to fulfill. So thank you for that, and we look forward to this conversation. So I'd like to open up with the first question that I had can you share what your desires and goals were in general when you became a photographer? And then how did the tragedy in Ferguson, the tragedy of Mike Brown's death, support or influence or change those desires? So kind of what got you into photography, and then how did that whole turn of events, what was the impact of that? Anyone who wants to start off, be the brave one and start off, please do.
Well, the phone's right here, so I'll try and be brief and pass it on. My initial interest in photography was part of work I did in design and construction in the built environment. So I was accustomed to photographing things like art and architecture that don't move. Now, on August 9th, I believe it was, that Michael Brown was gunned down, I decided there were some intersections of things I had done in terms of anti-racism workshops I'd attended and a few things like that. And when Mike Brown was shot down, I said, I can be silent no more. You know, I have to participate. And I was not accustomed to photographing people, spending a lot of time on the street photography, you know, however you want to think about it. So I needed to I needed to acquire that skill set. And I basically just committed to do it because I thought it was really important. As a person who is white, I also thought that in Black-led protests, I might best serve by remaining behind the camera and not trying to spend time in front of it. And there's other anti-racism work I can do with my cousins, in which I try and help them wake up to some degree. And so it was just a way of doing things along those lines that got me into the streets the week after Mike Brown was killed.
Okay, so before Michael, Bassam Mastery, live streamer, before Michael Brown was killed, I was never on social media. I didn't have a Twitter account, barely got on Facebook. I was there August 9th, after the Quick Trip got burned. And, I was witness to, innocent protesters being tear gassed, dogs being sicked on us, etc. And when we went home and we saw on the news, it was a completely different narrative. A lot of the people that were with us, they were pretty shocked. But my background as a Palestinian, as a Muslim, I've known that the media has been lying for a long time. So it came no shock to me. But so one day I was going through the App Store and I saw this live stream app and I couldn't believe it. So being a Palestinian, we are born activists. So one of the things that we learned is that, videotaping your protests make them more effective. But at the same time, with the live stream, it was also an alibi, to where, me and my friends, the protesters that we were with, we were safe because they can't try and come blaming us for things that we didn't do. It started like that, and it kind of escalated to where, people were tuning in daily to watch it going on. Even when all the cameras left and, CNN and everything, they all left, the live streams kept going. And now, my unique position, because there was a lot of live streamers. There was a few that were from St. Louis. Everyone else was pretty much out of town. So they really couldn't convey the message over why we were mad. Mike Brown was, unfortunate situation, but it was the last straw of a lot of incidents that have happened over the years. There was a growing frustration with the police, spanning back, decades. So, if you've lived in St. Louis your whole life and you're a minority, you've been racially profiled your whole life, tickets, etc. There was a group of about 200 of us that were dedicated to it every single day. And, so my main priority was to, keep them all safe from, getting charges pressed on them that they necessarily didn't do. But if the camera wasn't there, they would obviously try and pin it on any and everybody they could. So it was there for more protection, but also it got to the point where it got really big and people were getting information from that. And also, since it was in real time, there was stories that, the media would come out with that were completely false. Okay. And when the live stream would contradict that, they'd have to retract the story. So once the story got retracted, it kind of had to hold the police and the media accountable for their narrative. Mm-hmm. So, which was very important. So, a live stream is important for these situations, for your safety and for the reputation of the cause. Next, right there.
Okay. First, I'd like to say that it was interesting. I talked with Richard earlier, and he was saying how he was in the background, and I find him in images now that I didn't know him 4 years ago, and with Baxter, I think he was extremely bold and courageous for what he was doing with he would live stream right in their face, just right in the police face. And I'm thinking, is this real or he working with them? But I'm there photographing them. And today is the first day we've had a conversation from 4 years ago. And so I would say going back to August 11th, I remember I was editing some flowers. So I have like 2 monitors to edit on. I was out the botanical garden. So I was editing these flowers. And then somehow I turned on the television, which I rarely do. And I saw all these cameramen and people in Ferguson. And I like photographing people primarily. And I got a bunch of old lens. I was just collecting lens. I got about 100 of them, just old lens that you can adapt to the new cameras. So it took me a while. Like, I had this big, huge bag, and I loaded them up with lens. I was like, man, which lens to take? And I was just going back and forth. I took about 9 lens out there. And for the first, I guess, month, my progress was marked on what lens I used. So I still have them filed in that category, these old lenses, and they were all manual lenses. I didn't have. I was told that my kit lens, the wide lens, the 18 to 55 for Canon, wasn't a good lens, so I didn't even consider taking it. So the first year I didn't use it, and but I would go home and have so many things out of focus, and it was really difficult. But when I went out there, I just started having conversations. So August 11th, I can remember my first image. A guy was holding up a sign, and then I got some more. I got more images of people I knew, and I started recognizing faces. But I was still kind of in the background. I met Robert out there. I would ask him questions about how you do this. How do you get a good image when it's night, or just anything I would have. And he was just always so open and helpful. But my introduction was just to go out there, take some photos of people. I had no interest in activism, protest, or none of that. I'm with a lot of, like most people I know, have nothing to do with it. That's how I was. It's too black, you know. That was my thinking 4 years ago, before I went out there. And now I'm just totally the opposite. I actually, if I meet somebody and I ask them, what do you think about Ferguson? That's how I would, in my own mind, judge them, by their response.
Thank you.
So I'm Robert Cohen from the Post-Dispatch, and so I come at this a little bit from a different place, only because I'm a community photojournalist in the city, and I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I'm not a conflict photographer. I'm the one that goes to the baseball games or the the festivals, whatever events are going on in town, and bring back little slices of what it's like to live in St. Louis for our readers. And so when this happened, this was very new for me. I'm not accustomed to doing conflict coverage, and we've had some of our photographers have worked in active war zones before, where it was dangerous to be on the streets and work, and that's something I'd never done before, so it was new for me. But yeah, in terms of my role, I'm out on the streets of Ferguson pretty much to try to just bring images that explain what's going on to our readers, that enlighten what's going on to our readers, that that maybe perhaps tell them something about their fellow man that they didn't expect, or maybe they didn't see on TV. So that's kind of my role. I have no angle. I have no particular interest other than trying to tell an accurate story as best I can behind the camera.
So at what point did it strike you that this is something profound happening here? That we hear crimes every day. We hear police engagement every day. But clearly this was something very different. When did that hit you, and what did that feel like in that moment?
For me, I think it hit me strongest when Quick Trip burned, and I think even though police shootings happen in an urban city, I mean they happen in St. Louis. It's not common, but it does happen. I mean, we just recently had one, and so, you know, when this first happened on August 9th, my initial thought was, we'll have an active story for the next week, 3-4 days to a week, and then, you know, something else will come up. And so I worked a normal day on the 10th. I wasn't actually out there when it happened on the 9th. I worked a normal day on the 10th and went home. At the end of my shift, I'd still never been out. I'm sorry, I was out on Ferguson earlier in the day, but I went home, and then when we saw the looting starting, many of us came back, and that's when it happened for real. And I felt, you know, even with the looting, I still, while it was dangerous and it was, you know, a little crazy for a while, when Quick Trip caught fire, I was like, okay, we're going to be here for a very long time, and that's how it struck me.
Okay, I would say that first day out there, when I saw the officers, the way they were positioned with nightsticks, and it was just like something from the '60s. And on the other side of the street, you got young people. There wasn't a lot of older people out there. It was a lot of young people, older teenagers, and I'm like, wow, that's an overreaction. And I had a talk with Tony about this. You know, he said, well, maybe if they would have just came out and apologized without all the sticks and weaponry, we would have it wouldn't have escalated. But they took a stance, and you know, I mean, it showed us that they were wrong, and they were going to cover it up, and they were going to show how they operate. But I mean, I'm thankful for these cameras today. Somebody out there told me, some young person said, yeah, these are the new AK-47s. And so that's my motto with these cameras. Take them everywhere, record everything, and we can see that they've been effective.
I totally agree. Well, you know, being born and raised in the Ferguson, Florissant area my whole life, you know, that first night, the vibe, the anger, the passion that the people had, I could tell from then that this was going to be something different. It was all about trying to sustain it after that and not make it a 1-2 week thing, but keep it going. And about 2 weeks in, you know, when the cameras left and, you know, people were still coming out in droves and we were just not giving in, that's when I knew that it was going to be something special that might, you know, actually, you know, effectuate some positive change within our community. And we haven't gotten all the way there yet, but, you know, slowly but surely we are. And, you know, but I'm really proud of the way, you know, all of us stood up together as one and stood up to an institution that has been oppressing minorities for hundreds of years now. Now, you know, our ancestors have done this, and, you know, they made leeway, and it's time for us to finish what they started. And, you know, so when those cameras left and all those people kept, you know, coming every single night, I'm talking about staying there till 1, 2 a.m. in the morning every single night. That's when I knew that, you know, we're gonna change something in the city, and hopefully, you know, nationally. We didn't know it was gonna go national at that point, like it did. And I'm glad that, you know, we were able to spark that fire that, you know, politicized a generation of people who might not have been politicized if it wasn't for Ferguson.
Richard, what was that?
Well, I think there was a lot of it that was just a big impact on the 9th as things developed, and I was at my house in Tower Grove South, and I get the paper the next morning, and I did this thing I do in my notebooks, and where I figure the newspaper's got all the right words in it, they're just seldom in the right order, and sometimes I cut them out and rearrange them so they make sense for me. And it was a place and time where I knew, I think, within 24 hours or so that I needed to make a commitment to anti-racism work, the likes of which I had never done before. And certainly as things went on over the course of the first week, I mostly watched from the news, and they had a thing like, if you're in support of this, put a candle on your front porch, and answer things like that. So I did stuff like that until Saturday the 16th, when I went up to Ferguson with my cameras for the first time. And, by then, the Quick Trip had burned, and there were all kinds of things like that. Some of my early focus in photography with the built environment had me documenting the changes in graffiti to a lot of the buildings on West Florissant. I know Damon Davis did a bunch of work up there with his hands, and there was all kinds of other graffiti up there before that. So the Quick Trip itself changed a lot in like the first 2 weeks. So it was burned down. There's a lot of graffiti on the pumps, on the building walls, and people painted over that stuff right away. Then they put up the fence around it. So I was documenting a lot of that stuff, as well as, folks on the streets. Having my regular job by day, I wasn't up much until the wee hours of the morning, in order to take care of all my other responsibilities. But spent a little time up there and on floors in front of the police department and whatnot. And, got a lot from that. And you could tell from all the national media that started camping out there and how, I don't know what the right word is, almost like amusing. They would like sequester a space that's like up in the storage place, like so they could be all fenced in and do their reporting from behind a fence or whatnot. And then I started reading the newspapers, and I have a lot of respect for for Robert and the photojournalists and the images they've taken. But when I would spend time on the streets and then read the local newspapers, I found the American was like always more accurate to the things I was experiencing than other news sources, TV or the Post. But that was my experience. You could just kind of, I don't know, you could just tell that this was big.
Different.
Yeah.
So Robert and Derek have kind of touched on this a little bit. So can you talk about how you were able to distinguish, if you will, your personal feelings about this with your professional job as a journalist? So how were you able to be a photographer in the midst of this very human experience? And I know you are always doing that, but because of the circumstances of these events, how are you able to, I need to be a journalist right now, but I also am human in this moment?
Well, just real quick, since it's still down here. For me, it had to do with as much with, again, being behind the camera and really concentrating on the people in front of me. And while there was a wide variety of photography in the regular media, a lot of the stuff that would take off would be, something burning or, something getting thrown or whatever. And of which there were, some really powerful images. But I saw passion, love, desperation, fear, commitment in the faces of the people leading and participating in the protests. And that is stuff that I tried to concentrate on and capture, because I thought this is chock full of this incredible humanity, in essence fighting for its survival. And it deserves to be well documented. And so I see myself as much, if not more, of an artist than a photojournalist. And I thought that was just a space that I could operate in which I would, in some sense, be staying in my lane and doing something that was, perhaps a little bit unique to try and document that.
Well, for me, I never really considered myself a journalist, per se. I was a protester who was documenting my experiences. I was a sales manager before that. I've always done sales. I was never into journalism and whatnot. It was an interest of mine, something that I've always wanted to get into, but nothing that I actually thought I would actually pursue. But things happen to us in our life that change our perspective on things. And, me, being part of the protest family, just didn't want to be, demonized in the media. So we had to create our own narrative. And, being one of the few streamers that were actually from here and knowing how to articulate the issues that were surrounding the whole movement, is very important, because so that people nationally can understand, why we're doing what we're doing. And people have labeled me as a independent journalist, but I know I do different things. I'm running for office, for example, in 2020, and right now I sell life insurance. Back in sales. Also, try to do as much community work as I can. But as far as considering myself, like a journalist, never, came to mind that it would actually. I'd actually get to that point.
You were unaware that you were becoming a photojournalist in the midst of this situation.
Yeah, and not even just that, but also being a voice, throughout our, protest family, and being accepted, because of my views and my opinions, and the way that, the passion that I had for justice, was pretty extreme, and extreme in a good way, because there's no justice in this world at all. Only we can make it. So we have to do what we can to make it. And,
so Derek, how did you navigate that?
Interesting. It was it's kind of a conflict, because I'm supposed to, just mainly being of color, I should be louder. I should be, more in your face. That was my, that was kind of my thinking. But my associate and my bachelor's degree was in communication and filmmaking. So I went out there. I was going to capture these images, and at some point create a film. And I started off doing photos because I just couldn't afford to. I knew I wouldn't be able to afford to just do a lot of videotaping. It would take up too much hard drive space. In my mind, I knew that. I didn't know how long this was going to go on, but I knew that. So I was doing photos, and I look back, and I don't have as much video footage as I would like to have had. But for as it's kind of conflictive that I'm out there quiet. I wasn't speaking to anybody. I wasn't trying to get to know anybody. I wasn't interested in selling images to anybody. And I stayed to myself. And then it was a couple years later where I've actually started having conversations with some of the protesters. You know, I would probably send them some images through Facebook or something, and then we'd talk. But I was seeing other photographers, and you know, and they knew people, they knew the protesters, so they'd see each other and they're talking, and I'm like, wait, I'm way too quiet. And then sometime I would leave the event, and I almost be talking to myself about some things I should have said, you know. But I knew it wasn't my place to say anything to these the protesters, and in my own mind I had adopted all of them as like my children, and because the first part, the parents were not there. When it wasn't safe, the parents were not there. It was all young people. So I was just quiet, but Shahid Anthony said something at a meeting once. He said you see that brother over there? He was pointing to me, told these people there. He said these young people love him, and I had like they had never said anything to me. They looked at me like they looked at everybody else. It looked like I was in the way. That's why I felt like I was mostly in the way. And I've had Kayla Reed. She asked me one day, "Who you with?" You know, and it was right in front of that Andy Worm tire shop, right across from the police department. And I said, I'm not here for a confrontation. And I didn't say anything to her. I just kind of looked at her, and that bothered me for the longest time, because if I would have said I was with Jesus, it wouldn't have helped in that situation. Because if I said I'm with the protesters, she didn't know me. I mean, so I felt like, how do you answer that question? Who you with? So I've struggled with that. And now I would say, I just thought about this last week, that I'm a citizen journalist, because I'm not on payroll for anyone. I did some work for the Final Call, and but I couldn't think of to say anything at that point.
But today you can answer that question.
I hope that's the right answer.
Robert?
Well, for the journalism part, this one's somewhat easier for me because that's what I do. And we had photographers stationed in Ferguson, usually from 6 in.the morning till things ended at 1 or 2 in.the morning. And so we had people there all the time trying to cover as many different aspects of the event as possible. And so, for me, I'm very comfortable behind the camera. I'm very comfortable keeping my feelings to myself. But I am there to accurately convey what I'm seeing. And if there's passion, I want to show that passion. If there's quiet, I want to show that quiet. If anything happened, I want to come away with photographs that are accurate. If there were a couple nights where shots were fired. There were a couple nights where police officers got injured and protesters got injured, and I want to convey all of that. So luckily, behind the camera is a nice, happy spot for me, and through the years, it's kind of a nice refuge. If I have to cover a funeral for something totally unrelated, if I have to cover news that heart-wrenching news sometimes, behind the camera is a great place for me to be.
Erica, let me add one thing, that I'm a filmmaker. That's what I consider myself first of all. And I was saying during that time that I'm gonna tell my story when I get to make films. I'm gonna save a lot of the emotions, because I know I'm gonna need it at that time when you're putting something together. And I come to a point in life that I realize you only get so much energy per day, and you have to manage it. So that's my plan, is to try to get my feelings to come out through the film work.
So what were some of the more difficult images for you to capture, and why? What made it? What were your obstacles to capturing? Or did you have obstacles? What were there circumstances? I mean, the general circumstances, of course, was a protest, and there's a lot of movement, a lot of activity. There's some danger. But what were your challenges in capturing those images? And were there some that you didn't capture that you wish you had?
Well, while the mic is in front of me, I guess I'll speak this time. I would say Michael Brown's mother was really difficult for me because she always had a tear in her eye, but she didn't come out a lot. And then I just didn't feel comfortable putting the camera in her face. I didn't. And so, but she was like, for a photographer, she was like the prize. When she come out, everybody's photographing her. But I couldn't, well, I didn't avoid it, but I didn't look forward to it. And I felt kind of low as a person. Not as a photographer, but just as a person to photograph her.
A lot of our difficulty was logistical. Speaking for myself, we had we had made a purchase of some higher end camera equipment a couple years earlier, and the main reason we did it was to have the ability to send photographs to the office right out of our camera at Cardinals playoff games, and so we would plug the cable into the camera, and we were able to send right from wherever we were shooting. And what we didn't appreciate at the time were how good these cameras were to use in incredibly low light situations, which was the definition of Ferguson at 1 a.m. And so we were very thankful to have that kind of technology. But otherwise, most of my problems were kind of logistical. It was, I could never figure out how to put a gas mask on correctly. Mm-hmm. And I wore it twice, and then I just threw it in my trunk. I never took it out of the car again because I was just not doing it right. And so
Makes you feel better. I was the same way.
yeah. So every night I knew I was going to be choking on some tear gas, at least during those first couple of weeks. And so those were challenges. We also, for us as the mainstream newspaper, we also had the challenge of being constantly on deadline. We were constantly feeding pictures to the newspaper, constantly trying to get things out because they're trying to put it together at the paper, as well as feeding social media with the latest version of what's going on in Ferguson, and that's just a constant revolving deadline, a minute by minute deadline. And we ran into a lot of challenges when we had a relatively peaceful day that all of a sudden turned into a tear gas evening, and how we were going to handle that for the paper. And those late images became really, really important because otherwise we would be conveying to our readers that it was nothing but a peaceful day in Ferguson, where it didn't always end that way.
Were there some photos that you had to fight for to get in? Is something that you felt really strongly about, that this image needs to be in the paper?
We talked about that a lot, but those of us who were out there at night, we didn't have much time to talk about it. We would, if I would have photographed something that I felt was really important, and I would quick call to the editor or quick text to the editors, this is important and this is why it's important, and we should try to find a home for this somewhere in the paper and not let this get lost in the mix of everything else, because we're, with a lot of photographers out there for our publication, we're probably transmitting to the paper 150 to 200 pictures a day, and so that's a lot for them to go through and try to figure out what the story of the day is. But there weren't most of those discussions happened when we were doing kind of special sections or special presentations where we were trying to figure out the right way to tell the story. But on a given night, we were just trying to get things there and let them, use their best judgment too.
So the images that were, it's not even the images that were hard to capture, but what not to capture as well. Because, you know, as a streamer being out there, your safety is on the line. So, like, let's say if you're trying to film somebody doing something illegal, you might get yourself in a situation you might not want to be in. You know, and so, you know, that was my greatest difficulty, was just making sure that I didn't capture anything that was going to, you know, get other people in trouble or, you know, release their identities to people, you know, because the police were always watching. But what I did enjoy capturing was, because, you know, when we weren't, you know, on the front line and confronting police, we were mingling amongst each other. So being able to talk to everybody that was involved and let them tell their stories so that, you know, people across the nation can hear, you know, what people have been through, and, you know, having casual conversation kind of to humanize people, you know, in their eyes. And, you know, those were the greatest images that I was able to capture out of everything. I was real proud of that, just being able to, you know, mingle with people like Tony and, you know, Chad, you know, a lot of the people that were there every single day, so that, you know, people know that we were unified in our quest for justice, and there was no other motive besides that. So, you know, that was very powerful to me.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I was thinking of. One, in the fall of 2014, I got confronted a handful of times by frontline protesters who were like, "Who the hell are you? Are you a cop?" And when Flava Flav came in town and was up at the church not far from the Ferguson Police Department, I went up to that event and heard him speak. And then we were leaving the church to go down in front of the police department. And Nick, anybody remember, you know, Nick?
Mask?
Yeah.
He wore a mask?
Yeah. He died in a car accident a few years ago. Anyway, he got all in my face. "You're a cop, aren't you?" I mean, like.
I remember that, actually.
And like now, he's like, "I know a million people. I'm gonna find out. Go ahead and take my picture." Right? So he took my picture and all that stuff. And I think the next time I saw him, he's like, "Hey, man, how you doing?" So, and then one time in Shaw, at the site of Von Derek Meyer's killing, there was some gathering, and like a handful of teenagers, early 20s, like, "You're a cop, aren't you?" Like, and I was like, kind of getting surrounded, and I'm like, "No." I'm like, "I tell you what, let's look at my Instagram. You know, you want me to leave? I'll get out of here. But let's look at my Instagram." And they're like, "Yeah, he's okay." And you know, shortly after that, I was recognized pretty frequently. With terms of the difficulty of deciding what photographs to share, the one that comes to mind for me is a photograph of Mike Brown Sr. and his family at the first anniversary of his killing. And there's a picture of Sr. surrounded by family, and the sadness and the pain that's encompassed in this picture of like 6 or 7 family members huddled around was this like really poignant, beautiful, sad photograph. And I had this photograph, and I was like, I don't know if I should share this photograph. It's so like deeply personal. Or it seemed that way, but at an event in public that the public was invited to. So I asked about a half a dozen people, you know, "Hey, do you think this photograph would be okay to share?" And everybody said, "Oh, you should share it, you should share it." And so I did. And eventually I talked to Mike Brown Sr. It's like, "Yeah, do you know that?" "Oh, yeah, I like that one," you know. Is what he had to say about it, because it was about capturing the full humanity of the people in it who were there for the specific reason to mourn the loss, right, of Mike Brown Jr. So there are times when it's like looking at stuff and just wanting to be respectful, you know. So that was a time in which I didn't want to be all up in people's feelings, you know. But it was a time where I think I was probably maybe being a little overly cautious. So I asked a bunch of people. It ended up that the people in the photograph were happy with it. And so just real quickly, I would put all my photographs up in publicly shared photo albums on Facebook, and then I would share them with the protest groups on Facebook. So Organization for Black Struggle, Southside Unity, there would be like a dozen of them. I would just put this, you know, for use of the movement, free all, you know, and let people see themselves, right, and figure out how to use the photographs if they needed to communicate messages they needed to online about other things. And so, you know, this is different than other photography that I've done in which I have been compensated. Here it's a case of basically refusing compensation because I don't want, in this role, which is really different than Robert's, but I don't want to make money on the pain of others. Mm-hmm. And so even though these have been showed in galleries and museums and so on, it's not related to, you know, my bank account, because it doesn't seem appropriate in that way.
So the name of this exhibit is Civil Unrest in Review. Looking back, which of your, and it could be your photo or someone else's, but which, and it may be more than one, which photo or photos have had the most impact on you personally, and why?
When Edward Crawford, may he rest in peace, when he threw back the tear gas to get out of the, you know, that Robert captured, that was very powerful for me because, you know, my background being a Palestinian, you know, our resistance tactics were pretty much the same, and so it really like kind of, you know, like because when I went down there and I saw everything, it really reminded me of the West Bank and what Palestinians have to go through over there whenever they want their voice to be heard. So there was a lot of similarities there, and that hit me to the heart. You know, especially at that time we were over there, they were at war. So, you know, seeing that the similarities between my culture and what the African American community has to go through, really, it gave me, and words really can't describe it. It gave me a, you can say, motivation to pursue, you know, equal justice, you know, and doing the, you know, being a frontliner because of how similar the oppression is between both of our cultures. And to me, that was very important because, you know, out of that, there became an alliance, what we call Ferguson to Palestine, and you know, Palestinians, you know, the last 7 years, we've been organizing and being able to lean on each other for things was a very important thing. Like the first night when we were getting tear gas and everything, while they were being bombed on in Gaza, they were tweeting to people in Ferguson on how to make gas masks, how to get the tear gas out your eyes, and they're literally have bombs, falling from them. And I learned later on that, when the group Anonymous came out and they, released the information of police officers in order for them to give us Darren Wilson's name. One of the hacktivists, Commander X, who was behind the Twitter account Operation Ferguson, said most of those hackers were in Gaza as well. And when he was speaking to them on the phone, he could hear bombs in the background. And so, knowing that, those people over there who are, close to, really close to death are doing what they can to help people across the world. Me locally, I felt like I had a duty, not just to my community, but to them as well, to give them the representation that we did not have.
Yep. I would say probably the combination of images with Basham here. Because it's like the officer would be right where he's at. So I'm Basham. He's right here with a camera in their face. Just like, it's like it go on for hours. It seems like it go on for hours, literally. He's just right there. And it's just two different worlds. Just like, it's hard to describe, but when you see the look on their faces, it's no reconciling. And the other image, the young man they call him Low Key. He was 15 at the time. He's tall as I am. He might have been 6'1". 15. Him and the young officer in front of the police department were staring at each other. And it seemed like a half hour. And I'm thinking, if you thinking you're gonna have to do something to somebody, you don't have to stare them at that long. You don't. What is that about? What's going on when there's nothing really said, but they're just staring at each other? Them kind of images that I would say off the top. But when you talk about the quality of professional images, I think I looked at the post images once, and just the quality of the equipment they're using also just speaks of the work. It's just like it's beautiful in a sense, but a lot of the images that are captured out there are not glamorous. But when I saw some of their images, it was just something that I couldn't produce. But I would say that I could be in that vicinity with them. I would learn if they go somewhere, I try to figure out where they were going, because they knew where to be at the right spot, because they do this for a living. And then when you look at the images, they capture the image that you wish you have captured, right up close, no heads in your shot, anything like that.
And to add to that, the work that Robert did with his photographs were very powerful, and he was able to capture moments that other people simply wouldn't be able to. He has a very good talent for photography, and that he was one of the biggest assets that we had. Of course.
Well, I asked him about that.
I seriously want to thank him for all the work that he did, because it was very good, and it was pivotal.
I asked him, I think once, I don't know if you remember, I think it was you, we had a conversation about you taking your cameras on vacation. You say you leave them at home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was probably 3 years ago. I remember now having that conversation with him, and I was thinking, leave your cameras at home? No, there's no way you leave your cameras at home, but... Yeah, but he's been doing it for 30 years, so that makes a difference.
What photos struck you?
Yeah, well, sometimes the work I do, that the images that I might think are the strongest, that convey things to me more than other images, are not necessarily what our readers think. And the image of Edward Crawford definitely had a life of its own, and I was certainly, I was grateful to be in that spot when that happened, and also grateful to become friends with him afterwards, and we would go out on occasion just for lunch and talk, and just heartbroken when we lost him. But honestly, I didn't appreciate the impact that image had until the next day. And when social media just went berserk, I understood that maybe I just underestimated that image a little bit in terms of the meaning it had to the community. What drew me in, especially in Ferguson, were images that really conveyed passion, and that. Now, I remember one image in particular was very early in the game. It might have been on the 10th or the 11th. It was a picture of, oh my gosh, I hope I don't butcher his name. Jamel Span? Tony?
Yeah.
Span? Okay, Jamel. And he was carrying a heavy load, and he was so upset. And he was yelling. This is at the Ferguson Police Department, and he was yelling at police officers and was talking about the number of his friends that had been killed through the years, some by the hands of the police, some in other circumstances. And I remember Elizabeth Vega, another activist, she came over, she was trying to console him, she was trying, a few activists were holding him back.
I remember that picture.
And that one just stayed with me. That was just the amount of pain that guy had in his heart just really stayed with me, and that was a I guess one of my favorites.
It was a very powerful.
But it was also super early. I mean, it's like really things had not blown up in that way yet. But again, very grateful to be in the right spot when Crawford's picture was taken. Also, that was a game changer, I guess.
So I'm sorry, Richard.
No, well, let's see. I think there were a lot of images that were taken that I think were really important and really profound. The image I described about Mike Brown Sr. and his family was like one I took that was personally very impactful. Other pictures, I think, of a few things that I've taken that have to do with. I have a picture of Bruce Franks holding his son King, and it was just I think this past summer on an anti-violence march on Grand, and we went up to Cardinal Glennon Hospital where there's a little statue of Bruce's brother that was shot down, used as a human shield, and then there's this picture of and it's those connections between parent and child, and you think about the reasons why people are out on the streets doing what they're doing, and those are the moments that make me glad I'm out there to capture them, because I think they need to be preserved for people to see later when they're trying to understand what everybody was doing.
So I've noticed among you there has developed this camaraderie because you all were in a very unique space as journalists, and so I noticed as you came in, I was like they've known each other all their lives. So there were certainly journalists that were not there, but you all were, and you were there. Maybe not side by side all the time, but you all were there together. So could you talk a little bit about those enduring relationships that evolved out of being in this unique space, doing this unique work among yourselves or with other people that you encountered because of that experience?
August 9th, whenever a lot of us came out, and the following year and a half after, where we we're with each other every single day, it became more than camaraderie. It became more family. For the most part, Ferguson protesters, if we're in trouble, we know that they're going to have our backs, and vice versa. So, when you are, literally on a battlefield with somebody, and your safety, it is directly influenced by the person standing next to you and behind you, and going through these dangerous situations every single night, you create, there's a bond that's created that can supersede friendship and, make people more family than anything else. And that's why we call ourselves the protest family, because we're not friends, we're not associates, we're family. And, all of us have the same ideals, the same goal for the most part. So you can say that, it wasn't really hard to connect with them. It was fairly easy. And once that connection was made, and, like, for example, Tony can attest to this, I've been arrested. I was probably the most arrested protester in Ferguson. And as soon as I'd get arrested, I'd be out a few hours later, and that goes with anybody that would get arrested. So, there's just that camaraderie that started, turned into a family. And that includes, the journalists, the people that were there that were, Robert, he takes photos. He doesn't speak for the Post-Dispatch. So their articles, doesn't obviously reflect on his photography. But the things that he's done made him part of the family as well, especially everyone else. But the special work that Robert did, definitely, even though the media outlet wasn't biased by any chance, but wasn't, they try to keep themselves objective, but sometimes they weren't. But other than that, that was something really nice that was gained. You have 200-300 new family members, so it was a great thing.
And to add what Basham said, we can literally, any of us can sit and talk all day about Ferguson. With us having images, we can show images and we can just go on and on and on. And it can go from different conversations. And I would say that became my new family. So if you're not conscious now, I know you, I love you, but you're not part of the family. It woke me up to what's going on. So I would say that it's that impactful. And Tony and I had a conversation the other day about we both were kind of quiet people, but since Ferguson, like my photography, now when I go anywhere with my cameras, I'm going straight to the front. I used to be the guy who would try to, I'd be filming from over there and from way over there, from way down the street. I saw photographers come, and they would be from Germany or wherever, and they would come right to the front. And I learned that was a community. It's a community of photographers out there. When you ask them questions, he always have an answer, kind answer. He ain't like you in on his territory. And you appreciate that, and you learn from them. But for me, first and foremost, the protesters, I give all the honor to, because they made our work possible. Like I say, without them putting themselves in front, we have nothing. But and the young people, they have a special place now. I don't know if they understand it, but for us in American history, the Ferguson protesters were Time Magazine runner-up People of the Year 2014. They gave it to some doctors, I think, for the Ebola or something like that, some type of disease. But I just thought about that.
I think it was the Hong Kong
It was some.
protests.
It was some doctors they gave it to. But
One of the two.
But there was no way it was anything bigger than Ferguson. But it was just an honor, and that was the family. It was the Ferguson protesters, and who all was involved. Even though you didn't feel accepted, like no one, young people didn't come to me and say, "Hey, man, you accepted, you part of us now." They would say, "Okay, we're about to have a little meeting. No photographers, no cameras." And I said, "Well, okay, it's 40 y'all, and you trust 20 of them? I don't. I really don't trust none of you, but trust is not like that. Now we're in the open streets, and you saying you're not going to trust photographers. But my point is, anywhere we go now, we take our cameras and things because we can document. We have proof of what is said. So people should have welcomed that. So it's a lot to it.
Yeah, I work with a lot of photographers in town on a normal basis, as well as at big events that might be national events somewhere else. I'll see people that I haven't seen in years come into town, and that happened here in Ferguson also. I worked with photographers that I just hadn't seen in a couple decades, but those people came and they went. And the core group that was here every day, I cannot count the times I've seen Richard. Every day when you're out covering a protest, he was there. Other people were always there, and yeah, you got. There's a camaraderie with the photographers who were out there. There was a lot of sharing of information. There were some things that were going on with the protesters that I didn't know about, and maybe somebody else would let me know that, hey, this is going to be happening at some point, and I would, if I knew something, I would share that information with them too. So it was, dude. As Bossum said, it was like a family of journalists out there. Some are citizen journalists, some are regular mainstream media journalists. But it was made some special friendships out there. And there's people that are not sitting at this table that were also out there every day, like LB and Mike Thomas and
Reb Z.
Reb Z, of course, and
Wiley.
Mm-hmm. And so, it's this network of all these people that, though things for now are quiet in Ferguson, we still keep in touch all the time.
I would just say, in that building trust, you still have to build trust because if you're going to put a camera in somebody's face, they need to be able to trust that you're not going to just take it and try to embarrass them.
I think it's been, for me personally, it has been making friends, building trust, and establishing relationships that has been a really valuable and like heartfelt experience. I know I've taken pictures of these three. I got it. One of my favorite pics is Bob interviewing Mike Gardner wearing a tiger's head.
Where was that, by the way?
Well, that was the night it shut down the highway.
That was the highway.
Yeah. And it's a great picture. So there are things like that. Now I don't really consider. Well, see, so I try to say, I don't ask people to like invite me to their meetings or anything like that, right? So I don't want to be, again, shifted out of that lane where maybe I don't belong. On the other hand, so there's a difference between what are we going to do next week, what are we going to do tomorrow, and what are we going to do in 10 minutes, right? You know, when you're out on the streets. And so, you know, there'll be places where there'll be gatherings in the midst of a protest about where we're going next or what's going to happen next, and people will be like, all right, everybody, come in, you know, no video, no cameras. And then, you know, and I happen to be standing in the middle, and somebody will say, hey, you, no cameras. And somebody like Bruce or somebody will say, he's all right. You know, so, you know, that's nice, but that's what you get for being there in the long-term basis on the regular, you know. And so I just respect what those guys are looking for. If they want me to go, you know, 100 yards away, great, you know. If they're cool with me being there, you know, great. Because it's really just about, you know, I think appropriate documentation of the hard work that they're doing.
Oh, we have a couple people in the audience with us. Are there any questions that anyone else would like to ask? You have to speak now or forever hold your peace, because I have one more question that I do have for him before we wrap up.
Well, I guess one question is, were there other photographers there that were working undercover for law enforcement agencies?
Well, I saw plenty of police taking pictures and video. I do not know of anybody personally that was like undercover with a camera. Now that doesn't mean they weren't there, and it basically wasn't something I was personally paying a whole lot of attention to. But I'm out there with a ton of privilege anyway. So
I believe 100% that there were people there that were undercover. I was under FBI surveillance for a month. They admitted so in court. They charged me with a felony driving while revoked. They came and they got me the day after the riots, the no indictment riots, and they put a $15,000 cash-only bond on me for a traffic ticket, which the protesters gathered the money up, and I was out within a few days. So, you know, thank God for that. But I know for a fact that there were undercover people there because of the experiences that I went through. Being, you know, the most arrested protester in Ferguson, I was pulled into a lot of rooms where they wanted me to collaborate, snitch on fellow protesters. So there's a Palestinian/Arab thing that we do where when we're really disgusted with somebody, we make the sound of spitting. Like we'll go tfu, you know, like it's because it's, you know, it's offensive. So they actually charged me with spitting on a police officer when I didn't. Now, so we went in Ferguson, October. We shut down the Walmart on Hanley, and there was about 20 of us that went in there. We shut it down. There was a few hundred people in the parking lot, and that night, St. Louis PD came and got me, and they, you know, were like, "Okay, we got you on camera doing this. You know, we'll take it under advisement and let you go, but you have to give us names." You know, put faces to names, let us know where you're going, etc., or we're going to send you to the workhouse. I was like, well, okay, go ahead and send me to the workhouse. The whole time my bond was already posted, and they kept coming in and out, in and out. So at the end, right when they found out that they couldn't get me to flip over, they tried to bribe me into giving me money. They tried, you know, on like about a couple $1,000s a week to just inform, which I completely, you know, denied right away and went straight to the media with
Which
it.
police agency was that?
St. Louis City.
City.
So as soon as I got out, I went straight to the media, had an article written about it. And, you know, for some people that might not be, you know, as dedicated to the cause as I was, they might have been influenced to taking that deal. And I know for a pretty good fact that there were people that did, because there were people informing on me to the FBI. So yeah, there were undercover people there. There was a lot of undercover people there, and you know, doing what they could to, especially the people that started initiating the violence, were a lot of plans. People that we've never seen before, people that you know that just showed up out of nowhere and started, you know, looting and burning and whatever. And it's like, we've never seen you protesting before. We've never even, you know. So it was just like, and then at the same time, you know, they had a lot of us stuck on South Florissant, and that's where a lot of the businesses did not get burnt up or damaged at all because we were protecting them. But they had us blocked in there, and the National Guard was on West Florissant and did absolutely nothing to stop the carnage that was going on over there. And we were trained prior to de-escalate those situations so that it doesn't happen. So they really stopped us from being able to save our community. So it was an unfortunate situation. But if you look at the videos and whatnot of that night, you can definitely see how they pulled that off.
So, I have this, my final question is, and this is by way of advice. You all have the gift of telling profound stories through images. So what advice would you give, and telling that story in this instance under incredibly stressful, dangerous circumstances, what advice would you give to others who are interested in being storytellers through imaging?
Well, I would say, well, let's digress back to that last question, because what's important about that is before, right, like August or September of 2014, we didn't know each other. Now, Robert had a press badge on, so he would be clearly with Channel with 5, or the Post-Dispatch, I'm sorry, Post-Dispatch. So it's clear. But with me, I'm out there with cameras. You don't know who I am. I didn't know who anybody else were. So everybody was suspect. Everybody was literally suspect. And then especially if you're an older male, you're suspect. But the young people thought that because they were young, that they wasn't suspect. But where I'm from, they was the most suspect, because they do the most flipping and talking that you see today. So, but storytelling is whatever your passion is. I would say if you, it is said like whatever moves you, that's what you can talk about, or your experience. You can share your experiences better than anyone else's. Anyone else can share your experience. Your experience, if you can make it interesting, you experience what you experience. But for something like Ferguson, it's 1,000 voices, and 1,000 voices should be heard, because it helps when we hear each other and our different takes on it. Like what Baskin went through, it should be like all kind of resources here available for him, and his story should be told. Like it's a huge story, because he really put himself out there to be harassed. Why was it only one of him? And with all these people in this area, it should have been many with their cameras live streaming. So it should have been a community, that not one person. See, we'll put one person out there and let him take the brunt of it. So, you know, we do have a lot of stories to tell. It's just, it's a lot of work. So if people want to tell stories, then they have to put their boots on, because it's been said that, listen to Ken Burns, he said that 25 years outside of an event, that's when he's interested in telling that story. But things will change in 10, 15 years. you interview Basham 20 years from now and his take on what happened then. But to have these images now and to be able to go back later in life and get these images, it's a lifetime of work for us, for those who are storytellers that were in Ferguson.
Best advice I can give to budding storytellers is to try to find somebody that you feel does it well and call them up, get contact, and see if you can just kind of pick their brain about what they do and how they do it. We hear a lot of amazingly, there's still a lot of people out there that want to be newspaper photojournalists in a dying industry, and that's a real commitment. So you've got to be driven. You've got to realize how difficult it is to find employment, assuming you want to do this as a career. And but find the storytellers wherever they work, whatever they do, and just see if they'll talk to you and see. I do a whole lot of shadowing. I'll spend the day with college students, high school students, and they'll just spend a shift with me at work. And sometimes the shift is horribly boring, and sometimes it's interesting. But that's the kind of thing I encourage people to do, because it's tough.
For a long time, a lot of people in St. Louis, when it came to being harassed by the police, felt powerless. We we're going through a lot of things, and we had no ways of being able to get that resolved. And what I tell people is that when I went out there, I had no intention of being a voice or of the movement or any of the things that happen. But what I can tell people is that if you're passionate about something, that you do have a voice, and that you can go out there and you can make a difference. In this day and age, there's no heroes or saviors that are going to come and save you and save the whole world. You have to go out there yourself and try to make a difference whichever way you can. And fortunately, I was able to get to the point where people were listening to my story, and actually paying attention to it, and so my biggest advice is, don't let anything hold you back. If you feel passionate about something, definitely go out there and make your voice heard, because you never know, your voice could be the one that can inspire others to do what you do, or to inspire them to get with the movement and whatnot. So that's my biggest advice. Just get out there and and find your voice. Like Tony, for example, he with his quick fingers would, I think we were using Vine at that time, he was able to capture a lot of things that sometimes we weren't able to capture. And there was something that was very powerful that actually struck me emotionally. One of his videos is whenever that man got shot and Dilworth was right there, and the sound in your voice to get him help, it touched me emotionally. It really did.
You tell me that every time I see you.
Yeah, because it did. It's the truth. And so, and through those means, his voice was heard. He was able to inspire others to also, pick up a phone in their area and start recording. Because not long after that, We had that incident in Memphis, or what was it? I think it was in Memphis with Walter Scott. Where it was caught on video that he got shot in the back and
East Coast,
yeah,
Carolina, maybe.
Yeah, South Carolina.
yeah, okay, exactly, yeah. So that just goes to show that with the work that a lot of us have done, people know now to document things and let their voice be heard, and also protecting themselves and their community from predators who are have been oppressing people of color and minorities for the better part of 500 years now. So that was definitely my advice is go out there and do whatever you can, whatever you're passionate about, and people will hear you.
Richard?
Well, let's see. I think that practice. It takes a couple of years to get good at it, find your own voice, and get confident. But I think rather than like me telling stories, I'm recording the stories as they happen, and it's the people in the photographs that I like to think of as the focus of the work. And so I think it's simple like repetition and relationship building and showing up. Is really important. And I think I would probably speak for all of us here by wanting to say thank you very much to you for doing such a nice job keeping us in line, and Lois and Mark and everybody for putting the panel together.
Well, I'd like to thank you all again so much for being here. But thank you also for your work. It is, I can't even choose one image that has struck me more than another. They all are striking, and I certainly appreciate not just your talent, but even if it is your job, it takes a lot to do your job under certain circumstances. And the fact that you all continued and made the choice to do your job means that stories that would not have been told were told for the world to hear them. And so I appreciate the work that you have done, and encourage everyone to come to the Griot Museum of Black History at 2505 St. Louis Avenue to experience this work. The exhibit is Civil Unrest in Review. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lois Conley.
Well, again, I want to thank you as well for being here. Provided me with additional information that I wouldn't have even thought about. But I also have two quick questions. One is a general question for Robert, and one is a collective question for each of you. Robert, what do you think was the motivation for the post changing your assignment? You talk about you mostly having covered Cardinal baseball games and things like that, and suddenly now you're covering something as intense and dramatic as Ferguson. What do you think happened at the Post that they did that?
Well, I don't think it was anything other than following what sounded like sounded like an important yet routine story that broke out in St. Louis that all of a sudden just
Not expecting you to escalate.
really grew. Yeah, that really grew. But I mean, we're on the streets. We cover all kinds of harm on a daily basis, and so making the leap to what surprised everybody was how quickly the story grew as it did, and we realized it was going to dominate our coverage for a long time, and so there really wasn't much of a leap from the paper's perspective. It was just a matter of, at least from the photography department, it's all hands on deck, and we have a relatively small staff, and so we typically use some freelancers for assignments that we can't get to. And when this happened, it was okay. Everybody's covering this story. Anything else that needs to be photographed, a restaurant review, a sporting event, our freelancers are going to handle all of that. And so, once things grew as quickly as they did, it really wasn't much deep thought of how we're going to do this. It was going to be, this is a national, worldwide story, and nobody's going to beat us on it. And we're going to do what we do best.
Thank you. And the other question is for all of you. I'm just curious, and I might have missed it when I walked out. I'm just curious about what your involvement in the movement, any movement, protest movement, has been since Ferguson and other police citizen interactions.
Well, I can say since Ferguson, Anthony Lamar Smith was, Ferguson was, it's like everything is second to Ferguson. I went to Chicago, stayed in a hotel a month ago. 80 hotels in that area, they're protesting. Mm-hmm. So they protesting outside the hotel, the workers are. So I get my camera. So anywhere I go now, mm-hmm. I'm looking if there's a protest. That's one of the first things I want to know, if it's a protest, so I can go out there and document it. That's why I can say I document events, capture moments. And but anything like any protest, just 2 weeks ago, the 15-year-old was shot. And I went out there just to take some photos, and I had to drive around, take some photos, and then I decided to go live stream. And I look up, it's like 600 people commenting on the video, and I'm like, I don't have time to answer this is not what I was expecting. 20,000 people viewing it. I'm like, this is not really what I mean, I'm a filmmaker, but I'm feeling like that's somebody else's position to be out there doing that work, but no one was out there. The protest community wasn't out there. None was out there. And I would say, this is a little strange. But then one or two showed up, and we stayed around. But I'm out there, and the protest community is divided, but I can go to any event. And so I'm thankful that I haven't burnt any bridges with anybody.
The Ferguson movement has not ended yet. It's still in motion, and we've turned to a lot of different methods, like protesting at the ballot box. Thankfully we have State Representative Bruce Franks Jr., who was a Ferguson protester, elected into the House of Representatives, and I'm hopefully going to be running a campaign in 2020 to get in there as well. So a lot of people mistake that, what happens here locally is determined in Washington, when really it's in Jeff City. It's local politics that create the legislation that goes on here in Missouri. So, doing that and, for example, the Presbyterian Church was here a few months ago. They had a national assembly on Palestine and Israel, where they sided with the Palestinians that Israel is an apartheid state. And then we marched down to the Justice Center, and they had about $20,000 in cash to bail out low-level offenders. So that was great. That was a great thing. And Wesley Bell just replaced Bob McCullough. And he's promising to end cash bail for low-level offenders and a few other things to help, the people in St. Louis County at least, start recovering from, the debt that they've incurred over the years because of traffic tickets and, being racially profiled, pulled over, given 6-7 tickets, etc. And personally, also, I'm a Palestinian, so with the Palestinian cause, I've been active in that my whole life, so I will continue to be active in that as well. But also more of combining the movements together and, creating allies between all minority communities so we can speak as one and become the majority.
I have continued to show up whenever I can when I'm in town to document protests that are basically an extension of the Ferguson protest family and values. So I've spent a lot of time in the last week or so at Senator Blunt's office, where there's a lot of things that have been going on. I covered a lot of the stuff from the Stockley verdict. I've spent a lot of, I don't think I've missed a Von Derritt Myers memorial. I think there's one at 6
Monday.
o'clock tonight.
Monday.
Does it change?
No, yeah, it's Monday. On the 8th.
Okay.
Correct?
Well, I think there's a vigil tonight.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, and then I continue when I travel for work in outstate Missouri, when I travel around town to photograph the built environment. Sometimes I use that as ways to engage with my cousins, which is, my way of saying all the other white people in the world. So I went to the old St. Augustine's Church up on Hebert last week, and the door was open, so I went inside and took a bunch of pictures of a beautiful church in a state of great disrepair. And I shared it with some Facebook photography pages about old buildings and this, that, and the other thing. And it's a lot of those groups contain a lot of my cousins, etc. And so I would get feedback like, it has taken decades, let's see, thanks for braving the elements and capturing the heartbreaking photos, like it's some dangerous thing I'm doing by being on Hebert. There's a special place in hell for the ones who destroy holy sanctuary. And, so this is a little bit of the work with the cousins. And I responded, it's taken decades. And if you are right, that special place is filled with the white flighters, red lighters, and many others. And with all due respect, he says, you've missed those who physically perform the devastation. The white flighters were more than likely driven out by welfare rats. And so I just said, interesting but wrong. Books like Gordon's Mapping Decline will disabuse you of such ignorance. Why bring up stuff if you can't handle the truth that is well documented? And so I think there's, when you look at the history of, say, the North Side or whatever, and, what's gone on in the last 100 years, and you read about it from the local perspective, and then you let the historians with all their stats, talk to you about it too. It's really clear, how things have come to be the way they've come to be. And there's still many folks who find that truth too uncomfortable to acknowledge. And so with my photography in the built environment, I quite often confront those people who have difficulty acknowledging that truth and just say, it is this way because. And anyway, so those are things that keep me and the camera close together.
Well, thank you all. Again, I would be remiss if I did not also thank the sponsors for this exhibit, the Missouri Humanities Council, the Missouri Arts Council, and the Regional Arts Commission for their support of this exhibit that will be on display at the Griot Museum through October 27th. And that exhibit, again, is Civil Unrest in Review. Thank you all so much. Hopefully there will not be much more we need to protest about, but I certainly hope you all are around to cover it. Thank you, and thank you all for coming.